For our next conversation, we have a set of leaders here to talk about how to ensure quantitative literacy. And I say quantitative literacy because that's really the outcome. Mathematics is one of the inputs, right? But quantitative literacy is the outcome and the opportunity for students to make sure that that is a right for all students, not a privilege. So our group here brings deep experience and expertise with math, statistics, equity, and educational leadership. So first, all the way from Virginia, we have Dr. Robert Berry. Robert is a scholar on math education at the University of Virginia. He's done a lot of work on belonging and identity in mathematics. And he's also the president of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics, which is doing some important work on high school math. He has some information to share that I'll be passing out shortly, just to take home with you. From Merced, I want to especially thank Dr. Benjamin Duran for being here. He was already here, but he's doing double duty now because President Ochoa from Cal State Monterey Bay was called away last night on a family emergency. Ben is the executive director of the Central Valley Higher Education Consortium, which is based at Cal State Fresno and works with 27 community colleges and universities throughout the Central Valley. But I knew him first as President Duran when he was with College of Merced for 20 so years, back when I was working at the Hewlett Foundation, and he's been a great leader in the Central Valley. And he'll share more about what they're doing in mathematics. And then we have Dr. Alicia Smith Arriaga, who is the Executive Director of Education Trust West. As I mentioned this morning, Ed Trust West is one of the core partners of Just Equations, and Alicia and Ed Trust West have been leading voices on educational equity and math equity. Dr. Smith Arriaga has worked in education, research, and policy for the last 20 years. Which includes at the Hewlett Foundation, I have to mention because that's my alma mater, and Career Ladders Project, which has also been one of our partners. Importantly, she was a college math major and statistics instructor. So she, in fact, all of the panelists have experience as K-12 teachers. Ben had started in history and business, so they have a wealth of experience to share. We're going to ask Alicia to sort of steer the conversation, and then later we're going to open up opportunities for those of you here with us to share as well. So take it away, Alicia.
All right, thanks, Pam. We're on? Okay. Well, I'm super excited to be here with both of you this morning. And, I think it's always important to do, and they didn't know I was going to ask this question. I'll preface it with that. But it's always important to do a little blending of the personal and the professional, right? Of like how we got to this seat at this moment and what propels us, especially in this room, to do some of the important and deep equity work to ensure that students do have the right to mathematics and to be successful in mathematics. And so I'll start, and then I'm going to ask both of my colleagues here to say a little bit about some of the foundational experiences for you in mathematics that led you to this seat today. I'll mention two things. One is that I did not start off as a math major. I like to say that I'm a researcher by training, but an advocate by blood. I'm from Mississippi originally. And so that's the advocacy part. My parents have a long history in the civil rights movement. And I grew up enjoying math, but didn't really see it as a tool that I would really dig in deep into in college. And I had this phenomenal instructor my first year, and he, just to the points the students were making earlier, really believed that every student in that class had the capacity to do the mathematics that he put in front of us every day. And that was evident because he would often stay in his office for many office hours with many of us. And you could just see the love that he had for math. And I saw the beauty of mathematics into some of the things the students were talking about earlier. Just how it shows up in all the world around us. And when there's so many things that are chaotic and don't make sense and are unclear, for me, mathematics was something that I was like, I can solve this problem. I can get to this answer, and there are lots of different ways to get there. The other thing I just want to say is that it's super exciting for me to be sitting in this seat now, in this role, because I was at my first convening with several of the folks in this room around this very topic about 5 years ago, thanks to Linda Collins sitting right here in the front row. And it was at that moment that I thought, wow, there's a community of folks who are advocates and policymakers and researchers who are coming together to really try and change the way that mathematics is taught and the way that it's to open up more equitable pathways to students. And what a powerful lesson. And so I just also want to give thanks to the folks who started this conversation, not just today, but in the many, many years before that. So I'll pause there and then want to open it up to both my colleagues to talk a little bit about some of the foundational reasons that you're here today too.
Great. Me or you? All right. All right. Well, I guess my path to the space has been kind of a windy type of road. And I say that windy road because I would say I was a classroom teacher. So I was a classroom teacher prior to this. But, and when I was younger, I would say this. I come from a family of preachers and teachers. And so I am kind of this, you think about a Southern boy from North Carolina who grew up in Virginia and all the stereotypes that might come with that, particularly being a Black boy, all of those things are wrapped around my experiences. And so, so I grew up in the church. A lot of, Wednesdays and Sundays in church. And I rebelled against that. I would say that. I rebelled against that as I've gotten older because I think I was groomed when I was younger to become a preacher, a pastor. And then, and going to college, it was one of those things where I didn't want to go to college, but I had a grandfather who worked in the furniture factory for nearly 50 years. And he got me a summer job in the summer right between my first and second year of college. I went to college initially because that was the thing everybody's supposed to do. And I went to my first year of college, I went to a historically Black college, St. Paul's College in Lawrenceville, Virginia. And then I transferred because I didn't want to go to college. I didn't want to continue in college. My granddaddy made me work in the furniture factory. We worked 60 hours a week in the summer, no air conditioning. It was just brutal work. I worked on the glue mill. So I was that person who measured out wood and then took pieces together to glue it together to create whatever product. Because I was a young guy and I had just recently, I had some level of schooling, I can use the measuring parts. And so I was doing all the measurements and doing all the slicing. And it was dangerous work. Not only was I working with glue and all of the chemicals that come with that, it was also using equipment where I could have lost a finger or a hand or something else. And so you had to be attentive in that work. I knew very quickly that so this was in the give my age a little bit, mid to early 80s. I was making $17 an hour. And I was 19, 20 years old. I was making really, really good money. And when I decided I'm going back to college, a lot of my family members and cousins were like, man, why are you giving up all that money? But for me, it was, I realized the hard work for those who sacrificed for me and those who laid the foundation for what I could become. My granddaddy paved that path for me. He created that pathway for me. And he did not want me in that same path that he took, because he realized the sacrifice, the hard work, and the labor that he had to put forth for that to happen. So he wanted more from me than to work in a furniture factory, all but it was paying well. It was the intensity of the work and the labor that came with that. So I went to school, majored in civil engineering, didn't work as a civil engineer. Because again, when I mentioned earlier I was rebelling, I got to a point where I wanted to become a teacher. And so I went to the counselor and said, okay, I have all these classes, what can I do? She said, well, you can major in math. And that's what I ended up doing. Majoring in math, took all the necessary courses that I needed to do to get my credentials to become a high school. Actually, I became a middle school math teacher, became secondary certified, but primarily worked in middle school and worked in elementary. I absolutely love working in elementary. I think that was a career that I should have taken rather than working in middle school. Not that I didn't love working in middle school, but when I became a math specialist in elementary school and working with younger students, that's where I think I made my strongest impact as an educator. Um, and then, yeah, so that's how that kind of work has evolved for me. I love listening to Rebecca and Miriam and their stories in the sense that although I'm not first generation, um, I often tell folks I am first generation middle class, and I don't know the rules of middle classness. And so sometimes I might stumble, and so I'm still trying to figure this thing out, even at this point in my life and my career, learning middle class rules and some of the peculiar, how peculiar it might be in terms of trying to figure that out. And so I say that with a sense of helping kids and students navigate in those spaces.
Thank you. We can see why the personal is a powerful precursor, right? To why we're in this room. Could you also share?
Yeah, I started out. I'm older than my great. I think there's another person in my and actually probably started working before some of you were born. So way back when I had a wonderful childhood, though I grew up very, very poor. My mother and father were from Mexico, and like the ubiquitous farm worker, migrant farm workers in the Central Valley, they migrated to the Central Valley from Texas ultimately back in 1949, and had 8 children that they raised. So in the first 13 years of my life, I lived in labor camps, in migrant camps. But so did everybody else I knew, so did everybody else that I cared about. So it really was not a big deal. And so, but I in the Central Valley, I was in Merced County where I still live. I had a wonderful opportunity because we also were going to school with not only with farm worker children, but with the children and grandchildren of the Dust Bowl people who had come to California and had settled in the Central Valley. So if you read The Grapes of Wrath, we're ground zero, right? We're ground zero. So a lot of these young people that I was going to school with were just as poor as we were. And I used to kid with them because we say, you're even more disadvantaged than we are because we speak 2 languages, you only speak the one. But the other opportune thing for us was that these schools that we attended, these small rural schools, were staffed primarily by teachers, the men, who had come out of World War II, done the GI Bill, and become teachers. And a lot of them were out of the Midwest. So they didn't have a lot of experience with Mexicanos, right? So they had nothing but expectations from us. They expected the same thing from everybody every kid in the classroom. I learned that early on. So I was never fortunately, never had experience like what we heard this morning, where Latinos were put in the back of the room, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we got into a couple of fights with some of the kids from Oklahoma who were telling us to go back to Mexico. Now, I was born here, I can't go to Mexico. But, those kids, we ultimately became friends. We became colleagues. And because we all realized that we had come literally from, I mean, we lived in the same labor camp. So it's like, but we had these teachers, wonderful teachers. So as you had preachers and teachers, we, in my family, was teachers, nurses, and cops. And the reason that most of the people that I grew up with, and getting back to what I heard this morning, which I think was what Daisy said, I didn't hate math, I hated my teachers. That is so central to this whole notion of equity. And we'll talk more about it when we have an opportunity. But those teachers never, ever expected anything less from any kid in any classroom, and they really literally held high expectations. To the point where back in those days, if you acted up, they'd smack a couple, or they'd call your parents. Well, we didn't have a telephone, we lived in a labor camp. They'd like drive out there. Do you know that Benny was, oh, really? Whap, whap. So we really had an appreciation for our teachers. And in Mexico, the Day of the Teacher started. That's where the Day of the Teacher movement started. They have an immense respect for teachers in Mexico. And I remember seeing a poster that ultimately CTA adopted because they used to do Day of the Teachers. But I remember seeing this poster that said, Yo toco el futuro, enseño. I touch the future, I teach. And I thought that's, and so the reason I became a teacher, a high school teacher, was because of all the teachers. I mean, the only people we knew that had ever gone to college were teachers and doctors. And the only time you saw doctors was when you were sick. They didn't want to do that. So became teachers. And so at one time, the elementary school that I came from, the elementary school, now you have to stop to think, 600 kids. At one time, 13 of the principals in the Merced City schools, which is the large city, right, at 50,000 people. We used to drive to them like once a week, buy food and stuff, and come back. At one time, 13 of the principals and vice principals of the 17 schools in that district were elementary school kids from Planada Elementary School. That's how impactful teachers had been on us, on all of us. And then I was at the time the president at Merced College. My wife ultimately became and is the superintendent of the Merced City Schools, also a Planada, because those teachers were so impactful. So when we talk about this equity, this notion of mathematics and equity and privilege in the Valley, and I have a chance to talk a little bit later about the Central Valley higher education. For us, everybody is everybody. Everybody is in. All is all. Everybody is everybody. And so boutique programs, I understand sometimes there's a need for them, but if it's good for like 30 kids, why isn't it good for like 1,000, right? That sort of a thing. So that's kind of our story, my story.
Well, two very powerful stories there, right? And I think in both of those stories, we heard a lot about teachers and the importance of math teachers. And we know that is an area that, especially from the mouths of students this morning, depending on who is in front of you, and we know from research as well that has the greatest impact on student success. Yet we also know, to this point that you were just making, that we have some pipeline issues in terms of what the teacher workforce looks like. So it'd be great if we could start off by talking a little bit about, in terms of the teacher pipeline and the shortage issues we see there, what are some of the major issues and what are some of the promising things that you're seeing that are being done to close some of those gaps?
Okay. Sure. So, if you don't mind, can I push back a little bit?
Yes, do. Please do.
And the reason I want to conceptualize this in an interesting way. Yes, there are some shortages. However, I think there are also some issues when we think about particularly math teachers, when we think about math teachers and the way they're assigned to teaching courses, and oftentimes the least experienced teacher is often given the most challenging courses. So I'm going to argue that we also have a retention issue. And so this retention issue might be a byproduct of the kinds of assignments that teachers receive. And so one of the things in my role as NCTM president is that we've been talking about this issue of balanced teacher assignment. And perhaps if we have a balanced teacher assignment in a math department, and I'm talking high school math department, that there's an entry-level assignment and an upper-level assignment, then the distribution of responsibility is distributed across the entire department rather in concentrated spaces. And so I'm going to argue that part of the shortage might be of our own doing within the profession. And I say of our own doing in the way that we go through this induction process with new teachers. So I'm going to argue we need stronger support for new teachers. We need mentorship in the same way that we think about mentoring students. I think we need the kind of mentorship that we need for inexperienced new teachers in classrooms so that they can find models of excellence. Or at the very least, learn how to navigate space. I think we all need different kinds of mentors. I think about my first few years of teaching. I needed a mentor to show me where the copier is and how to turn it on. But I also needed a mentor. I think my first mentor, I had a different mentor where we can talk about issues that were sensitive to the Black community. And I say that because I taught in a predominantly Black school district and a predominantly all Black school. And some of the issues of navigating that space. And so I needed several mentors to lift me up and support me. But so the shortage, also, when we think about the shortage as it relates to the number of teachers coming into schools, I do think we have a significant number of students who major in elementary education. And I am wondering, what can we do to provide support structures? Because I do think there are many teachers who teach elementary who have a love for mathematics. With additional support, they can have this K-12 span of mathematics teaching and learning. And so I think we can think about support structures in play there. Not only, and not to say that we want to remove folks from elementary, but I do think that we can deepen folks' understanding about mathematics to have a broader span of access to teachers in mathematics. And I also think we have to go into spaces that we traditionally don't go into to find the kinds of teachers that we might need. I know that, I know at Clemson University and Claflin University in South Carolina, they have a program called the Call Me Mr. program. And these are programs that nurture and support Black men who want to become teachers, and understanding the unique needs that they may have to navigate in the space in this space of becoming teachers. So I guess my simple answer is yes, there's a shortage, but I also think we have to think about retention, think about structures that negatively impact retention, and then thinking about spaces where we can go to find the diversity of teachers that I think that we need as we move forward.
Yes, all great points. And I appreciate that pushback. That was great. So, and in that same line, as we talk about pipelines, I know you are doing a lot of work with the Central Valley Higher Ed Consortium. And in terms of teacher pipelines and creating pipelines for educators and some of the recent reforms that have happened, can you talk a little bit about the role of the consortium in that work and some of the promising things that you're seeing there?
Sure. And I agree totally with what you were saying about the retention. And then, of course, we have an aging math faculty, right? So we're losing folks. So in my wife's district, which is the best paying district in the area, they're having a tough time, obviously, finding math instructors. So if they are, I know that the small rural schools are having a tough time. So the Central Valley Higher Education Consortium, formed about 18 years ago, originally was pulled together by, at the time, the president of Fresno State, a fellow named John Welty, who brought us together and said, we don't have enough Latino males going to community college and the CSU in the valley. It's just like, what's going on here? It's still not great. That's why it was formed, and then all over the years it has morphed into what we are today, which is this institution of 27 members in a 9-county region that is really kind of like, I hear, the size of South Carolina. So when you think about that, and you think about 14 community colleges, 4 community college districts, 3 CSUs, University of California, the newest research university in the United States, and 5 independent colleges. We have a board of directors then that comes together and frankly speaks with a single voice in a way that I've not seen. If we try to do this like sometimes in the Bay Area where people are poaching each other's students, I don't think you would get that same sort of a thing, right? Sometimes they poach each other. Hey, you're in my hood here, and the same thing in Southern California. Not so much there. Everybody treats each other well and with respect. So a university president of a 29,000 student university will sit next to a president of a 3,000 kid community college, and literally will be treated exactly the same, and will listen to both exactly the same. Having said that, as we've been implementing 705 and 1110, Executive Order 1110 at the CSU, we are in the Central Valley. The Campaign for College Opportunity, I think, noted that there are Central Valley colleges that are early implementers. We're further along than other folks around the state. But that wasn't like because everybody got on the starting blocks and then bam, they took off. Back in 2016, before 705 was penciled out, before Tim White was penciling out Executive Order 1110, our board of directors had a retreat, and we looked at the research around mathematics and around English, and we noted, and I think as Daisy indicated, 1 in 5 kids, get through, graduate. Well, we noted that. We said, hey, these gateway courses are keeping these kids, especially kids of color, from graduating. So back then, we started implementing co-requisite remediation programs or courses in the Central Valley in both English and mathematics. English took off. Math people are a little bit more reluctant, we're not sure. But and they still are. They're like, But we're making some progress. And more recently, we just held a convening this last week with math faculty and advisors. But where it's taking me is one of the things that we're finding is that not only is there a math faculty shortage that may not be there yet, but it's looming, it's coming. But the other thing is that we're finding that some of the math faculty who are being thrust into teaching this co-rec remediation, these courses, who had never been there before, and I know, I understand what they're going through. They're not going to tell you, hey, I have a PhD in mathematics, I can teach this. They don't know, they're being told that they need to teach differently, they need to teach a different kind of young group of young people, etc. We have not done, and I'll say this, I'm going to say it as many times as I can as I go along, because the conversations we're having here today, the folks in this room, we need to take these conversations to policymakers and other folks. One of the things that when AB 705 was signed, with what we don't have in there, and I heard last night that some of the dollars early on the year before were for startup, which makes fine with me. But what's happening when we get these pieces of legislation that are like this, the same thing is true with guided pathways. What's happening is that there is no implementation framework, dollars, support to take care of this professional learning and to take faculty who saying, hey, you are a content expert, but you're not an expert in teaching this way or that way yet, but we're going to get you there. So we need to really do that. So that's in faculty development, because I do think it'll go to retention. I do think we'll lose people who say, I'm doing this anymore, I'm out of here. The other thing that we're trying to do in the Central Valley, which is also a math faculty issue in the K-12, in the middle schools in the K-12, is that we're really pushing to blur the lines between high school and community college. We're trying to implement dual enrollment to the point where as many kids as we possibly can get an Associate of Arts degree before they graduate from high school. and a significant amount of others will have significant number of units. So we have a little, for instance, give you an idea, we have a little tiny high school, 600. I mean, it's tiny for you guys, but it's 600 kids out of 100 seniors. Out of 100 seniors that graduated, 21 of them walked through the community college graduation the week before their high school graduation with an Associate of Arts degree. That also tells us that there are significant numbers of them that had other units. That's because we're trying to develop this dual enrollment. And that's happening in different places because in the rural parts of California, where we're from, a lot of the rural parts, we just don't have the capacity in terms of math faculty to expand and offer all of these other sorts of things. So dual enrollment sometimes serves the purpose for those folks. Having said that, what we're finding is we're having a tough time finding faculty to teach those dual enrollment courses at the high schools. So one of the pipeline programs that we're talking about is Brandman University, which is one of our independent, they're Chapman down south, Brandman up here, one of our independent universities. They're actually pulling together a program where they're going to the local teachers and saying, if you got a master's degree in something, if you got a master, we can get you from here to here in X number of months by taking math, and prepare you to be math teachers so that you can do dual enrollment, or you may be teaching these other quantitative reasoning courses that the CSU is trying to push if they ever come down the road. So we're looking at pipelines that way, where we're looking at existing teachers to try to make them either better math teachers or math teachers. Then the second thing is what you were suggesting, which is to go out and find young people, especially people of color, who are interested in becoming not only teachers, but teachers in the STEM. That we really push that we take away this fear of math and science from those young people, and we get them to understand. So the University of California is really helpful in that respect because they're sending young people out. University of California is University of California at Merced is one of the most diverse campuses. It's a Hispanic serving institution. I think Riverside and they are the only Hispanic serving institutions in the UC. And who else? Santa Cruz. And cuándo? Santa Barbara. Well, there you go. I'm glad you guys corrected me because now I can, I've been lying for all this time. But they're an Hispanic serving institution, and they were almost instantaneously an Hispanic serving institution. They didn't ultimately have to get there. But they're sending out young people. And so we're delighted. Those are some examples of some of the things that are going on.
So, thanks for sharing about all this. There's a lot going on in the Central Valley.
Yeah.
Things are a lot of progress, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that does seem to be a through line in many of these conversations is also, you brought up kind of some of the PD that folks were saying that they would like on the higher ed side. Dr. Berry, we know you've done a lot of extensive work in this area too. Mm-hmm. What do we see as some of the most promising practices in terms of changing the way math is taught in classrooms to hold some of those equity principles that Pam showed us earlier?
Great. So one of the things I would say is that I think higher ed can learn a lot from K-12, and I say that because even gaining the mathematical knowledge that one needs to be a dual enrollment teacher or even kind of moving forward. There are some great teachers in K-12 who are doing high quality work who can be instructional leaders in that space, even as we think about improving teaching practices in not only in high school, elementary, middle school, and high school, but also in higher education. So much of my work is focused on issues of equity, and particularly much of my work is focused on thinking about equitable mathematics teaching practices. So I operate from the assumption that all students want to be positioned as being competent. And when we operate from that position, and when I operate from that position, all students want to be positioned as being mathematically competent. And so what are the structures in my classroom or in the work that I do that positions one as being competent. So I want to find those places because the perception of smartness is real for kids, for students. They want to not only be positioned as being competent, but they want to be perceived as being participatory. And so, how do we broaden the space of being participatory? I think that's in our instructional practices. It is in the kinds of things that we do in our classrooms, whether it's high school or in higher education, that contribute to that. So how do we engage in discourse practices where students can be participatory? How do we broaden the space of participation? And that might mean doing some practices where students are engaged in small group instruction and thinking about the kinds of tasks we give to students, those kinds of things. And so for me, it is operating from this assumption that students are smart, and now I am going to create structures in the space in which I teach so that all students see themselves as being smart. One of the things I do with I run a program called MQ, Math, Men, and Mission. And one of the things when I greet my boys, these are boys who are in middle school, elementary, middle school. And so every day in our program, I ask them, well, how are you doing? And the expected response is, I am truly wonderful and getting better. Every day, I am truly wonderful and getting better. The reason why I do that is because it comes from this position of identity and agency. Because it gives me an opportunity, if Harold says I'm truly wonderful and getting better, I'm going to ask Harold, tell me all the truly wonderful things about you. Or tell me something truly wonderful you did yesterday. Because then, how often are we asked how truly wonderful we are? So for me, that's about identity, how he sees himself. Now I'm going to connect that identity to the kind of work I do in my classroom. Because now I want to figure out, okay, I want to find about how am I going to connect how he sees himself and as it relates to how being truly wonderful, and how am I going to now connect that to the kind of teaching practices I'm going to do in my classroom. And the second question I would ask Harold, he says, I'm getting better. Tell me something that you're working on. What are you getting better at? That's about agency. That's about agency. And so Harold is working on something. He's getting better. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect this into my math class to figure out what are the things that he's working on and how can I connect that sense of agency to mathematics, to participation. And so these things are not independent. Identity, agency, and competency work is very ingrained in the kind of work that we should do in our math classrooms. Too often people position this work as social emotional learning. I think it's bigger than that. I think it is bigger than that. It's about, because we lose too many kids, too many students who don't see themselves as a part of this work. And I think it is central to our work to help students see themselves as doers of mathematics and engage in the kinds of practices that doers of mathematics get engaged in. And this is how it connects identity and agency.
That was a powerful identity, agency, competency. And we know that, some of what came up too in the beginning of that response were some of the things that we also think about at Trust West around the importance of intersegmental relationships, right? And the sharing of practices across K-12 and higher ed. So, I know you talked about some examples of that in the Central Valley that you've really seen blossom. I don't know if there are other examples either of you want to lift up of places where we've seen really strong partnerships between K-12 and higher ed working to make some of these changes that we're talking about.
Yeah, we are fortunate because we've had these partnerships with these great organizations. So one of the treasured partnerships we have was with the California Acceleration Project, the CAP, and then there's another CAP, the California Academic Partnership Program, which is out of the California State University System. And then we also have a partnership with the Charles A. Dana Center of the University of Texas in trying to create math pathways. But one of the things that CAP with two Ps, California Academic Partnership Program, has done in the Central Valley that we're part of and that we're going to get behind is that they have identified 10 community colleges that are selecting mathematics pathways as a project, and they are identifying 3 or 4 schools, not school districts, but schools in their attendance area that are really high high underrepresented numbers. And they are trying to create these pathways of mathematics for the students out of those high schools into the community colleges. And so it's going to be really interesting for us as we follow that along. The other thing that we're now doing is we're starting to have more conversations with our K-12 partners. We have in our consortium, we have two of our consultants are former K-12 superintendents. And one of the ways that we are doing this is to help us come together with them on the implementation of the California College Guidance Initiative. It's called CCGI for short. And we have a relationship with the Chancellor's Office that's helping us do that. And the reason that's so important is because we now understand that data and the importance of data for the placement of students, for faculty to know how to do what they do is really, really important. But the California College Guidance Initiative allows young people in middle school and high school for participating K-12s to get together with their counselors and their parents to start together to put their ed plan together early on. So they're pushing their ed plan forward. Now, you come to a community college and we're supposed to sit down there and say, okay, we got to do an ed plan for you. But what if already an ed plan's already in the works? That doesn't mean they can't have an aha moment somewhere along the way and then change. That doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is that they've given some thought, and then hopefully the parents have been involved in giving some thought. Well, that's where we're hoping to get more of these young people to think about math and STEM. And then it shoves their transcripts forward, their financial aid information, and it's all like clean stuff, right? And so right now, we're looking at about a 3-year implementation. Right now in the Central Valley, all 3 CSUs are in. We've got about most of the community colleges in. We're going to bring the other ones in, and probably about 65% of the K-12 districts that are in. And then we hope that in 3 years. So that is where we're starting to get our intersegmental relationship with the superintendents and the principals. The other thing is that in our convenings now, so I told you that in 2016, the board of directors got together and said, we're moving forward. We're going to move with co-rec remediation. We're going to move this. And they did. And they got behind it. They went back home and they told their folks, hey, we're behind you. But what we have found, and I was telling you about this support, is that faculty are so essential to where we go for it now. So everything, all the convenings that we're doing now, we're being informed by our faculty. It's bubbling up organically and said, if you're going to drag us out of our classrooms and bring us to Fresno or bring us to Modesto for a day-long convening, it's got to be good, and here's what we need. And so we're asking the faculty. The faculty are the ones that are starting to create those agendas, if you will. It is no longer experts coming and saying, here's what the faculty need. The faculty are telling us, we need this, we don't need that so much. And so we're doing that. What we're also doing with respect to the intersegmental piece is that they're starting to now invite some of their K-12 partners, right? So we're wanting to start to have dialogue and conversation between K-12 folks, 9-12 primarily, some 6-12s, but 9-12 folks together with our faculty. And then the other folks we're bringing together are the IR directors, along with our advisors and K-12 advisors, to start having very similar conversations. So the IR directors are all jazzed up because nobody ever invites IR folks to anything other than their own things, right? No, but now they're being integrated. Now they're so essential. They're so essential to what we're doing that we literally can't move forward without them, because the faculty are saying, hey, we need some data coaching workshops. You're giving us all this data. We don't know how to analyze it. We don't know what does this even mean. I shouldn't say they're not like me, because I would say, I don't know what this means. But they are saying, we need someone to help us analyze it. That's why the IR directors and the IR folks in their colleges are being so essential, and they can go down and start looking at some of the K-12 intersegmental stuff.
What about, are you seeing other intersegmental promising practices in the work that you're doing as well?
Well, am I what I am seeing is that there are states around the country that are engaging in these practices of looking at pathways from from pre-K all the way through high school. So one example I would like to kind of talk about is in Alabama. One of the things that they've done in Alabama is they've detracked in K-8, and then high school they've taken this what is called a geometry first approach. So their first high school course is geometry with statistics, and then they offer, then there's an intermediate algebra and an advanced algebra course. To kind of get at this is then what happens is there are these courses along the pathway where students can continue on to see what are their third or fourth course in high school that they would take. What's powerful about this is then it then leads to what is your first course in 4-year or 2-year colleges? And then you can see that first course in 4-year, 2-year colleges, and then the math core pathways along that. And then at the end of that work are careers. So a student can say, I want to be X. This is the course I need to take in college. This is the course I need to take in high school. And then there's not, because of detracking in K-8, so they brought together a lot of stakeholders. And they brought together stakeholders from industry, they brought stakeholders from higher education, K-12, parents, all together to kind of create this kind of pathway or discussion about, how one moves from a career, and then how then you can backtrack that to the kinds of courses that a student might be able to take. So it's still in kind of working through their legislative process, but I see very promising work with the amount of stakeholders that were at the table for that kind of work, and unpacking and thinking about how we can connect all of those stakeholders at the table to think about what might mathematics look like for all students, each and every student. And then how that then expands beyond high school and even for a 2-year college, or even for those students who choose to go into careers, we still have that discussion as well.
So those are two really great intersegmental approaches that are happening. And one of the things I just want to name to the audience is I'm going to ask 1 or 2 other questions, but then I want you to be marinating on, we're going to do a full group discussion in just a few minutes. And I'm going to ask a little bit of a provocative question now that was also, I did not tell my colleagues in advance, so I'll put that disclaimer out there. But we know one of the things that we've been doing the last few weeks, especially at Ed Trust West, is talking a lot about the recent CAS scores that just came out of the state. So right now, about 80% of Black and Latinx students in California are not meeting math standards. And we know that that's not about student ability, right? It's about all kinds of institutional structures that we've been talking about. And we know that that's also about structural racism and bias and the way that that shows up. But we look at those numbers, and then we've been doing a lot of presentations across the state as well in tech firms and other companies where we hear about the lack of tech diversity in the state. And we know that for many of those roles, math is an important skill to have. But there seems to be really this disconnect between what we see happening in K-12 education and in higher education and what is happening in employment and what is needed, and the mismatch of the demographics, right, in those two spaces. And so we look at that, and in some ways, it makes me think: do we have a math crisis on our hands, right? And if we do have a math crisis, why are we not, as the state, acting with more urgency? And why are we not connecting these two conversations? And if we were to connect them, what are some of the solutions that we would be proposing? So I know that's a very big question, but what I'll do is bring it back more generally and say, would you agree that we are facing a math crisis? And if so, what should we do about it? Small thing.
Yeah, that's a big question.
Right.
To have not thought about it.
Right.
But here are my initial reactions. I think the results that you receive is by design in the structure that was created. Because when you think about tracking that happens in school, it was designed for the students to be successful. It is because you have, so when we think about tracking, you think about those who are in lower level classes and those who are not in those lower level classes. Who are in those lower level classes? It's highly predictable. Tracking is highly predictable. Tracking is so ingrained in our culture that it's normal, and when you suggest something different, people go crazy. I'm sorry, I was too emotional about that. So the results that what the end product of that, one could argue was done by design. And so we have to think about how do we create structures that all students have access to high quality curricula and also have access to high quality teaching. And I'm going to offer that we might have to think about the structures in K-12. That means we might have to really think about what are the roles of tracking and how it impact that, and should we consider detracking? Not should we. We should consider detracking as a solution to that because it gets the results of that. We're seeing the results of that. I mean, it is so insidious. And when you think about one of the things that conversation that we're having with NCTM, when we think about not only just kind of high school and then moving on to secondary, but tracking is become a normal part of work. So I'll ask this question because all of my thoughts are not fully conceptualized, so I'm rambling a little bit. But let's think about the role of readiness assessments that happens in pre-K. We're assessing 3 and 4-year-olds for readiness. Ready for what? And so I'm going to argue then that creates the first structure that leads to tracking because some students are deemed ready and some students are deemed not ready, and we're not certain what we're agreeing upon being ready for. Ready for school at 3 and 4? Or what are the, so I just want to raise the question, let's have a critical conversation about the role of readiness and how we use it to advantage some and disadvantage others. And so, and then how does that contribute to the whole notion of tracking, which then leads to some of the outcomes that we see as measured on standardized assessment?
So, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And then Pam said you wouldn't ask any hard questions.
I know, right?
Betrayed here. I do believe that that if there's this tracking going on, I mean, historically we know that that's exactly what it does. The other, I would take it, again, going back to the part of the state, the part of education that I'm familiar with, also would go back to what one of the comments that you've made, which is with respect to the quality of instruction. The ability for faculty, for instructors in the K-12 system to teach math to the level that they need these youngsters to do well in those exams. And in doing so, if I would like to see that data disaggregated, because I really would like to see where are the majority of those kids coming from. We know intuitively that they're coming from inner city schools and from small rural schools out in the hinterlands. I think intuitively that's where the majority of those youngsters would come from. So as a result of that, I think the state of California could very well seriously take a serious look, a step back, if there is in fact a math crisis that could ultimately be recognized. As, by the way, when SB 705 passed, it was like unanimous, wasn't it? It's like everybody said, yeah, it's about time we do this. At some point, if someone can have the conversation around mathematics that needs to be had, it goes back to someone said earlier, I think it was up on the screen, like, what's the rush? Why are we thinking that you've got to take 18 weeks and then you got to learn everything in those 18 weeks when maybe that's not the way Ben learns? Maybe Ben needs maybe Ben needs 36 weeks to get the same thing that Alicia gets in 18 weeks. How do we structure how we teach mathematics so that we do make it fair for everybody and all to the point where so that when not only when the testing comes out, but ultimately the proof would be in terms of ultimately getting into university and moving forward and getting into. And then recognizing too, as in terms of learning, recognizing that a kid at 13, a young woman at 13 is going to have a tough time, but ultimately blossom. But maybe a young Latino male isn't going to blossom until he's 19 or 20. I mean, it's just, we just don't look enough at how young people learn. And so we've got the old methodology, which is we teach everything in these blocks, and if you didn't get it, you didn't get it. That means you're not going to get it. That doesn't mean you're not going to get it. It means you're not going to get it during that time.
So I want to add to that, because one of the things that's just kind of churning in my head is sometimes we use those results as weapons, and we weaponize communities. And so, I mean, we say this about communities based on the aggregation of result, and perhaps we might have to consider the assessment may not accurately assess what students actually truly know and understand. So rather than as using it as a weapon to then further marginalize communities, we might have to look inward and think about, do these actually capture accurately what students know and understand? Are there other modes or ways of assessing students so we can capture what they know and understand? And so I come from the position of really thinking critically about this work and about this, how we speak about people and how we use things to speak about people. So I'm very careful, and I'm being measured with my words here because we're being recorded, but I'm very careful. I'm very careful in thinking about this in terms of, I want us to think about tools to marginalize, tools as weapons to further marginalize people when we may not truly understand what they know and can do. And perhaps we might have to then look towards the assessment itself. And the question then the ultimate question is, why do we assess students? And what do we use that data for? And I raised the question, we just have to have a conversation about it. We just have to have a conversation about it. We assess students and then we use that data for something. For what? I mean, if it's to gain more resources for communities that's been marginalized, perhaps. But if it's not, I'm just rambling. I'll stop.
Yeah, well, all very provocative questions. And things we should be thinking about, right? Because we know, the one thing that we do know is that we have a lot of work to do. Oh. And I think we can all agree on that. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is spend 2 minutes turning to your elbow partner, just talking about what came up for you, any questions that you have, and then we're going to come back full group and do a quick Q&A. It sounds like there's some great questions now marinating out there. So we're going to open up the floor. Yes.
So why don't we name a major culprit, which is our belief in these standardized tests in telling us anything about what people know and are ready for. They don't tell us what we need to know. They're creating this crisis. Just 80% of the people failed them. Well, maybe the test is just not appropriate for 100% of the people.
All right, we gotta. Yes. Oh, could you introduce yourself, please?
Judy Kish, and I'm a professor at San Francisco State, and old radical.
Well, thanks. With that comment, there were lots of hands that shot up. So I'm going to go back here, and then there was a hand in the middle as well.
Doug Sobdi from the Data Center. Assessments, those large-scale, high-stakes assessments are part of a broader accountability system that every state, by law, has to have in place. And K-12 schools, K-12 school systems are quite beholden to those accountability structures. So I'm curious to hear from the panel, what recommendations would you make for adjustments or eradications of those accountability structures at the state level? You can keep it in California if you like, or go more broadly if you want to.
Thank you for the question, Doug. So, so I think we have to have the conversation and really invest in the ways that certainly the culture in which we operate, assessments are part of that, and we could go wholly to just not assess kids, but there are some things that we've learned about communities and folks and the resources that are made available to communities from assessments and things of that sort. But I do think we have to have a conversation about broadening the space of assessments and thinking about, are we capturing what students know and understand? So should it be a multi-guess test, multi-choice test? Could we think about ways that students can express their understanding differently rather than filling in a bubble? Could it be, and I understand, with my researcher lens on, that some of these things that I'm suggesting are high inference, and that and the need to be objective. I mean, is underlying some of this, but are we over reliant on this, trying to be objective in designing assessments for the sole purpose of objectivity? Then we get to reliability and validity. And so it's just kind of I know the concerns of doing portfolios and all of those kinds of things. It might mean, I've seen a school in Raleigh, North Carolina, and it's a museum school. So it's a charter school that sits inside a museum, and the kids don't get grades. And one of the things that they do is that they have to meet the standards, but kids create this portfolio, and then they have to defend their portfolio to their parents, to the grade level team, and any other invitees that they want to bring in. But the parents and the grade level team then decide whether the students met a set of standards that were for that time period based on the work that they've done. That's phenomenal work. It's investment for the kids. I often say, I want children to choose math. And what structures can we create that children, I'm saying children because I'm thinking about children. I want students to choose math, and too often we have structures in place where students choose not to choose math. And so how do we create those structures where students would choose math? And I think that we can do that. And it's thinking about how we rethink assessment might be one of those things.
I'm with her.
All right, was there a hand here, and then we'll go here? Oh, yes.
I'm just going to make the comment that in some sense, the students are collateral damage. And if you go back into history, when does all this accountability and standardized testing take off? It's after the Nation at Risk report in 1984, right? And teachers' unions made a pact with the devil, with Reagan, right, for federal money in exchange for accountability. And really, the exams are weaponized against teachers and teachers' unions.
Could you say your name?
Bruce Cooperstein from Santa Cruz.
Thank you. All right, thanks for that comment. And then here, and then the row behind. Okay.
Hi, Anna Mayer, Learning Policy Institute. Since we're on the topic of assessment, I wanted to share that I lead a group called the California Performance Assessment Collaborative, which is working with schools and districts in California that are doing graduate capstone and portfolio defense work. So I just want to acknowledge that there are some really dynamic K-12 educators in our state who are working on other forms of assessment. We work a lot with LA, Oakland, Pasadena, but we also work with educators. We've had some conversations with Fresno, Sacramento. A lot of this work is happening within linked learning pathways, which is a real asset. So, yeah, if anyone wants to know more about CPAC, we're the other CPAC. We discovered after the fact that the conservative so we're the other CPAC.
Could you say what your CPAC stands for again?
Yes, California Performance Assessment Collaborative.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. And then Chris and Melina.
I'm Chris Edley from the Opportunity Institute, and I teach at UC Berkeley Law School. I'm concerned a particular concern of mine is legitimacy, by which I mean these two kinds of questions. On the alignment, cross-segment alignment, the responsibility, the allocation of responsibilities to K-12 versus community college versus UC, et cetera, to put it in California context. Who should make those decisions? And also, another problem, when we're talking about the scope of a right to quantitative literacy, how much is enough? Or when we are establishing performance standards / cut scores on our tests, on the ambition in each part of the curriculum, who should be doing that? I'm a little wary of saying, say with respect to math, that it's only a question for people who teach math or have degrees in math, because I think it's about a lot more than content expertise when you're making those kinds of social judgments. This all was impressed upon me when I chaired 2 committees for the National Academy of Sciences. One was on creating performance standards for adult literacy. What's basic, what's proficient, what's advanced. And the other, when I chaired a committee on setting performance standards for NAEP. What's basic, not what's the methodology that should be used. And it comes down to who should be around the table and who should bear what responsibility for delivering the success that we as a society believe is important. So if I have to reframe that as a question, it would be how much of the authority for answering these questions should teachers be willing to cede to other voices?
I think authority is shared, and so the way I want to, someone put on my K-12 hat and kind of think through this and process this as so Pam presented earlier the purposes of mathematics to expand personal and professional opportunities, understand and critique the world, and experience the joy, wonder, and beauty. And I want to speak to this idea of experiencing the joy, wonder, and beauty when we think about if all of our students can leave school. So first of all, I would add one of the purposes of mathematics in school in general to be participatory in a democratic society. And now, with that in mind, if all of our students can experience the joy, wonder, and beauty as it relates to mathematics, that comes with asking the kinds of questions that we ask, being critical of kind of data that we're bombarded with daily, really having a critical eye and lens on that. Is that responsibility wholly in mathematics? I'm going to argue no, it's not. But I do think it creates opportunities. And so one of the things that we have not done well enough in mathematics, and I'll be my own critic, is that how do we engage other spaces? And when I say other spaces, I'm thinking about content areas in this conversation about how we work collaboratively in the broader space of education. I do think there are opportunities that we can begin to have this discussion, but too often, I'll leave it there. But I think there's space to have this conversation about the shared authority here in this space as we begin to understand how we can begin to collaborate. Because I think, yeah, I'll stop there.
Well, at a much lower level than this. When Senator Alex Padilla here in California passed AB 1440 back in 2005 or 6, that began the associate degree for transfer. It was for the purposes of making sure that community college students didn't have to take 70 or 75 units before they transferred to university, and then another 65 or 70 units to graduate, because Stanford wasn't doing that, USC wasn't doing that, Harvard wasn't doing that. They were getting their kids through in 120 units, right? So why were community colleges? Well, it's because different universities were putting different requirements on folks. They were adding additional math requirements, they were adding this, they were adding that. Having said that, so getting back to who should be in the room, I don't know who should be in the room. I would defer to folks here, but I will tell you this. At the time when we started talking about associate degrees for transfers, when we brought faculty from the CSUs, because UC was not involved in this. They were asked to be, but they didn't need to be. UC, but it was CSU and the community college. We literally brought faculty together. So, like you can imagine, we're going to ask you to look at courses, to align courses so that they are substantially the same as yours, so that if a kid went to your university as a native student, as a freshman, and they were taking these courses, what parallels to the community college? So we were in a room, we got in a big room, and we said, we're in the Central Valley. So we tell them, you have to hang your guns and your knives on the wall before we sit down, right? So everybody sat down, and they're grumbling because university faculty just couldn't imagine having a real substantive conversation with community college faculty. And I can't imagine community college faculty thinking they can have substantive conversations with K-12 faculty, which I think is a bunch of baloney. But anyway, the lesson we learned then was once you let people like duke it out a little bit and establish themselves and huff and puff, and you had good facilitators that started own facilitators, their own faculty. It wasn't experts. It wasn't, it was who facilitating the conversation. And they started getting down to business. Thoughtful people coming together to do the right thing will do, in fact, the right thing. At least they did in this particular case. So when we started, we did have, the occasional faculty members said, I've been teaching for, I was going to say 45 years. He's taught 45 years at UC Santa Cruz. Isn't that awesome? But this other, this one guy said, I developed this course 32 years ago, and it's always been part of this, so it's got to stay there. And I remember the president of CSU at the time said, this can stay there. It can stay there. You guys just collectively in that department have to decide which other course you're going to throw out. And then at the other end, they started duking it amongst themselves. But the point was that ultimately, at the end of the day, we closed the doors, locked the doors, barred them, chained the doors. At the end of the day, we said, look, we want to come away with at least a framework for having. So as we had these conversations for the next several months to come away with, in this valley, these ADT courses, there was this wonderful relationship that formed between the community college faculty and the CSU faculty who had really never crossed paths. And my sense would be that when you start to talk about alignment in the K-12, between K-12 and community colleges, that I think in the Valley we're going to try to take a similar approach. Now at that higher level as to, do you need business in there to talk to you about content and all that? That isn't in my area, so I would defer to Doc over here.
All right, I'm going to go. There was a hand, over there, of Pam.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, well, Robert, in particular, you had talked about these pathways that lead to careers. And I want to ask what that looks like in terms of content, and specifically around content like statistics, data science, mathematics, modeling. What's the role for that? We had the students who spoke this morning, both were in statistics courses that led them in different directions. So what do you see as the role for some of this less traditional content in the pathways? And you can refer to catalyzing change if you want.
Thank you for setting me up there. So the issues around, so I mentioned the Alabama example earlier, but one thing that I did not talk about, some of the courses that were in that pathway, but not only did they have a kind of a geometry, intermediate geometry and algebra, but they also had things like, mathematical modeling as a course and within that pathway. And so particularly, we can have a discussion about what is mathematical modeling and things of that sort, but nonetheless, it has some of these practices and processes that folks can use that are transferable, whether you choose to go to a STEM pathway or whether you choose to go to a different pathway. It is those kinds of things that help us think about the kinds of problem solving, the kinds of the modes of representation, those kinds of things. It challenges us to use mathematics as the content area to think about how math applies in multiple spaces. So they had those kinds of courses within that. But it also had the traditional sequence of courses when I say a path to AP calculus. I'm going to argue that we need to have a conversation about AP calculus, but we can have that somewhere else. But I think that has to be on the table as a conversation. The privilege that AP calculus often get, when for many careers, the path to calculus is not necessary to be successful in those careers.
That's right.
And so why is there such an intensity on that pathway? And there might be other things that we might consider within the pathway, like statistics, like some of the data sciences, like the mathematical modeling, that will prepare students for broader spaces and more careers. And I'm not saying to the exclusion of AP Calc. I'm just saying that AP Calc is probably receiving a privilege in a way that we might need to just have a conversation about, and where we might need to elevate other spaces so that, even if you have these experiences, this will lead to the kind of career that you have chosen for yourself. And so in catalyzing change, what we've done is we've identified 41 essential concepts all students should know and understand when they leave high school mathematics. And I'm not going to discuss those 41 things, but what we wanted is that's just kind of what we call a common shared pathway. And these 41 essential concepts were in the first 2 years of high school mathematics, where they're in this common shared pathway. And after the first 2 years, then students can make decisions about where they continue their study of mathematics. And within that common shared pathway, there is a focus on modeling, there's a focus on technology. And so we can say when students go through this common shared pathway, that each and every student have experience, the mathematics that they need to know and understand to be successful. Now, after that common shared pathway, it is, what do I want to do when I leave high school or college? I'm thinking, I'm a father. If I would have asked one of my sons in college, one's graduated, if I'd asked my boys in ninth grade, what do you want to be when you grow up? They weren't clear what they wanted to be, and I don't know, but I do think if we think about what can we use those first 2 years of high school for, it might be get them to think about and how we use mathematics in that space. So it's really thinking about what should be there, and then how then they make decisions about what they're going to do after they leave the common shared pathway. I hope I answered your question.
Okay. I'm going to take one last question.
one of my concerns about, and I fully support a range of options for our students, because I think the calculus is not only the gateway, but it also has a status.
Right.
And in terms of who gets in it, and a lot of students take it not necessarily because they want a STEM majors, because that's what I need to take to get into UCs. It's my ticket.
Mhm.
So it has the status among the students and among the parent community.
Right.
But one of the things I think that has to change if we're going to have these other pathways is one of the implications that's happened of tracking is that expectations are students spoke about it when they talked about what the teachers had, and the piece that they had is those teachers believe that those students could be successful. And it sounds like a small piece, but I think what's happened and one of the implications is tracking is, and all teachers want students to succeed, but they have seen that the students who tend to succeed look a certain color, and those who not are in these classes are black and brown and may have different languages. So it's perpetuating that in a subliminal way, a teacher's mindsets about who can be successful in mathematics. So unless, I think we talk about student agency and identity, we need to talk about teacher expectations and what that looks like, and how teachers talk about what does it mean when a student who may express their mathematics differently in a different way than I'm used to seeing in this narrow band of students that I've taught in these upper level classes. And I need to see that mathematics looks and sounds different from different students who look and sound different than I've worked with in the past.
Right.
But we haven't gotten teachers a lot of time and support to talk about those. We've given them the content and they know the standards, but they haven't talked about those elements that I think are critical in having more of our students be successful.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. One of the things that I worked with a group of white women teachers at one point in my career, and I'm bringing this up because we had a conversation called Confronting the Lies I Tell Myself. And my role was to be a supportive but critical friend, because these women did not have experiences, in this case, the Black community, and just want to know more about, and it's like, so, they want to know, they had curiosity. Curiosity is a wrong term to use. They just didn't have experiences, and they didn't know who to go to and ask questions. And they didn't want their questions to seem like they were being racist, because some of those questions can be taken to be as racist, but just wanted to develop more understanding. And so I do think there is this kind of space that we can begin, as teachers begin to think about how they see kids and students and how they see communities. They have to learn about those communities. And it might mean that they have to invest and take the time to invest in those communities. In the same way that I think we are going to have to create spaces for them to have those conversations. It may have to happen in teacher education programs or credentialing programs. It has to happen somewhere where they have to learn about the broader community, because we know that there's evidence that and I'm not going to quote the exact number, but there's a significant number of white folks who only hang out with white folks. And we're going to have to do something to have some impact on that. In the same way, there's a significant number of Black folks who hang out with Black folks. I mean, so how do we then think about learning about the resources in different communities and how those resources impact how we see and perceive those communities?
Wow, great. Okay, so that was Karen Mayfield Ingram who asked the question. She's a math educator at Lawrence Hall of Science. I want to thank the panelists. I don't feel like the conversation is finished. I think we teased up a lot of questions, and that's why we have the rest of the day to keep deliberating on some of these things. And we're actually going to take a minute, or let's say 5 minutes, to sort of help synthesize the morning's conversation. You have in your packets, in your folders.
I'm sorry, can we applaud?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.